everyone, it's Kyle Bohannon here with another episode of the Art of Physical Fitness Show. Today we're here with the elusive Matt Perryman of myosynthesis.com. Matt, introduce yourself to the people and why they should care about what you have to say.
All right. Well, thanks, Kyle. I appreciate you having me around today. Glad to come on and speak a little bit. As he said, my name is Matt. I've been training since 1998 myself. I started out as a typical little skinny kid. I was about 130 pounds when I was 18 years old. And I got into weightlifting, as most kids of that age do. I wanted to get a little bigger, attract some ladies, get some muscle. And so I joined a gym, started working out. About a year later, I got into the sport of powerlifting, which was kind of a mixed blessing in its own way. It exposed me to a lot of what I would consider solid training practices. It got me to squat, it got me to deadlift. And it also, over the years, I think it got me bigger than I would have been if I just spent my wills. I was doing a lot of those flex bodybuilding routines from the magazines back then. And so that was a big phase shift, and it got me into this circle. Anyway, long story short, I've done that for, it's almost 15 years now. I got into coaching about 10 years ago, just doing it casually. I've spent the last 5 or 6 years working as a part-time as a personal trainer, strength coach, whatever you want to call it. Right. Both in person, and I do some online consultations as well. And that's pretty much where I stand right now. I've got my blog at Myosynthesis, which I've had for about 5 years now, where I try to talk about topics that don't often come up in strength and fitness and nutrition. People, they often accuse me of being the science guy, but that's a half truth. I'm very interested in science, what it says, but I'm also interested in just, in a real way, just thinking about these things. What do they really mean for us? Say you go to the gym, and sometimes the research you found on PubMed doesn't always line up with that. So how do you reconcile that? Do we just use a common sense approach, or should science drive all of this? And these are the kind of questions that I'm more interested in thinking about these days, rather than just straight up training information as such. Right. So that's me in a nutshell.
So going off of that, that's a great segue into what I want to talk about first, simplifying training. Where do you stand in this regard as far as how you approach your training? Would you say it's an effective approach to basically blend the two of science and just under the bar experience, taking your under the bar experience, filtering in a little science, seeing what works, trial and error, throwing out what doesn't, and progressing from there through your whole life and career, because it's not a short-term fix, obviously.
I am, again, this has been a big change for me, say, since 5 years ago. I was very big into I call it the PubMed science, which is where you go and you see what research is saying. Okay, what does research tell us that builds strength? What does it tell us makes muscle grow? And I was trying to incorporate a lot of that into training. And I still do that to an extent. But the last few years, I've really picked up on the trial and error aspect of it, as you say. It's very much about getting in there and actually trying it. It's like, does it work? That is my number one, and I think it should be the only standard I use anymore, is does it get it done? And if I can say yes, then and with some caveats. The caveats would be, do I enjoy it, and is it going to get me hurt? Okay, those are subsidiary to that, but I think they're still important. But at any rate, does it get the job done? And if it does, then yeah, I think it's worth doing, or it's at least worth investigating, I would say. If you've read my blog, you know that my big thing recently has been the squatting to a max every day. And that is, I think, case in point as to why you should be very cautious about trying to get too close to what the research says without trying things. Because had I just listened strictly to what all these papers are saying, I would have never even tried that. And then here I go and I read John Brose, and he's getting just these amazing results with his Olympic weightlifters. And then I go in and I try something very similar to that, try it for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and I never burned out. Numbers kept going up every week. I felt better. My injuries, I've got several old injuries that I thought were going to leave me unable to do any heavy lifting again. And suddenly here they are, they're fine. They're not bothering me. I'm not getting hurt again. I'm getting stronger, and I'm doing everything wrong according to what this orthodox wisdom says is supposed to be happening. And so that really got in my head, and I really started thinking, something, there's a divide here between what is actually happening here for me and then what this science is saying should be happening. And that got wheels turning. And it's like, why am I listening to this telling me I can't do it when I'm seeing it happen right now?
Right.
And so I think we have to be very, very, very careful in saying when these things can't work or how things are going to happen simply based on going by what this published science says. So yeah, that's how I try to approach it now. I'm very much rule driven, let's say, rather than science driven. I just say, if I go in and I lift weights, well, what am I going to do today? I'm going to squat. Okay, well, how am I going to squat? Well, let's warm up and see what happens.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, I'll warm up, and I say I get to 2 plates, and I'm feeling kind of grinding at that point. Well, I may do another set with that. And if it loosens up and I feel good, well, great. I'm going to add another 20 kilos and see what happens. And I just keep that process up until I get, to a heavy set for the day and call it done. Or, if I'm having a bad day, I may just stick at 2 plates and rep out. The whole point I'm trying to get at is I don't have a program when I go in. I have an idea of what I'm going to do. I have an exercise I'm going to do, and I just do it. And it just works itself out.
I think it's like you've been reading my training logs or reading my mind or something. That's exactly how my training has shifted over the past few months. Is going to that phase from a strictly regimented. There's benefits and you need plans and everything, but just going based off of feel and by the set approach. Not even when you go in there, you might have a feel that today's a squat day, today's a deadlift day, like you were saying, but then you play with it based on that. And then if you don't get it today, who gives a shit? I mean, that's one day that's one day out of however many days you got left to live in this world. So just like you're saying, that's perfect. I love that message where it's just play it by ear. I wanted to kind of trace back to when you were talking about the maxing out every day type of the program you're going to. And I actually had a question a few weeks ago posed to me. I can't remember who the person was, but he was addressing that high volume, and he was trying to get to that point of what you were talking about, a high volume of training plus a high level of intensity highly frequently. And that's how I originally found out about you, was through that question. He gave me the articles that you'd written, and I agreed 100% with you. And we'll get into it further about emotionless training, which you deal with. But mainly my question getting into it is, when you're talking about that maxing every day, is that obviously you would perceive it in 2 different ways: emotionless max and a amped up max? Would you perceive it in that type of a mindset? If I'm reading it right, what you're saying?
Right, and that's really the trick. Is that when I tell people it's squatting to a max every day, and I'm doing that for somewhat of a shock value because it gets people's attention. They're like, how do you do that? And it is partly for shock value, but there's also a bit of a truth to it as long as you look at max in the right way. And as you say, there's a very, very, very real difference between what you can call a contest max. And I don't know, Kyle, have you ever competed before in powerlifting or?
Never competed. Got a show. I am looking to get in the first weekend of March. Was my first one.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay. Well,
never
you'll see what I mean then. But there is a very real difference when you actually are stepping on the platform. When you actually go to a meet and you actually have to do those lifts. I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, I get nervous. And it's not like a nervous for a job interview. It's just this kind of energy that's just in the air.
Right.
And a meet can go for 6, 8, 10 hours, depending on how big it is. And you're spending that whole time just in that state of arousal and, excitement. And it's very, very different when you step on the platform to pull a deadlift or to hit a squat, and you've got that crowd there, and you've got that energy and that excitement happening. And this is actually a very real difference between a max you could hit in the gym when you're not in that state of emotional wind-up. And this is very important. It's very important because I found that I was guilty of this for many years, but I would go to the gym and I would try to train that way. You go in and you pop your coffee and your Red Bulls, and you pop ephedrine and you're blasting Metallica and your headphones.
Gotta sniff the ammonia.
Yeah, hit the ammonia and then go and trying to roar.
Right.
And people, you do this in training. I did it for many years, and this was a big part of making this daily training work, was to get away from that, to just dump all that, leave it behind, and I call it training chilled out or training relaxed, but
It's practice.
it's a right,
You're training
right,
this and it's just like, and why waste the energy on if you are a competitive athlete? Why waste all the mental capacity that it would take for that one training session when the one date on whatever the competition date is what matters? Why waste it? Why just get in there, work the technique, work to that heavy weight, and progress from there over time.
right. Well, that, and then as I did some digging, I've done a ton of researching into why this might have been happening, and it comes to find out that there's actually some very deep connections between your emotional arousal in your brain and your physical condition. They're not separate as we're used to thinking. You have people going on about, oh, neurological fatigue and this and that. It's not that simple. It's very true to say that when you get excited mentally, emotionally, it actually physically affects your body in a very real way. And this is leading to a whole just range of issues. And I won't dig too deep into the science here, but long story short of it is I really am convinced that a lot of these issues that we call recovery issues that we think are physical, they're actually not. That they're a product of us training and staying in that excited, aroused state while we train. And that it kind of has this feedback because when you're in that state, you beat your body up more. And then that also contributes to the emotional wind up. And it just becomes this vicious cycle of emotional, physical. And if you train like that constantly, if you're trying to do 2, 3, 4 workouts like that every week, and then you've got to think about the stuff that's happening outside of the workout environment as well. You've got work, you've got bills, you've got family issues. All of this stuff adds up. It's not happening in a vacuum. So I think, well, why am I going to go to the gym and make it worse by trying to go in and butt heads against my PRs every freaking time I work out? Well, don't. Why not treat the gym like it's a relaxing, just, I don't want to mean that you're not working hard, because there are ways you can put effort into your training without making it emotional.
Right.
And it's a fine line, but this is what I've been trying to get across to people is that when I go in and do my daily maxes, I still strain under the bar. It's still hard work. It's just not like I'm winding up and putting my mental energy into the bar while I'm lifting. It's a matter of trying to be as cool as I can while I'm straining. And it's effective. It is effective, especially if you get the workloads with it, across a week. If you go in and squat 5 days a week and you're hitting, 3 or 4 attempts at a maximum for the day, and then you do some back off work, that's a lot of work spread across those sessions, and it can't help but add up with time. So I am pretty much convinced that's why it works, is just because you get a lot of practice in with these lifts over time, and you're not burning yourself out at the same time. So
kind of tying into that, how it can burn you out mentally, overanalyzation that people what we go to in this industry so frequently, so easily, we get so much into the nitty gritty, small little minute details that don't really freaking matter at all. Um, what is your opinion on that? I mean, the goal that we need to be doing is, in your position and in my position, is kind of akin to what I don't know if you're familiar with the famous Bruce Lee quote where he talks about when he first beginning in martial arts, a punch is just a punch, a kick is a kick, but once you start progressing, there's a punch is no longer a punch. It's about the mechanics of it, and you start analyzing the mechanics. But then once you reach this expert level status, all of a sudden it is what it is. It's just a punch. It's just a kick. So why do you think in this Western culture and why we overanalyze things so frequently, so easily, instead of just observing, going through a little trial and error, and progressing from there?
I'm sorry, Kyle, I lost
What'd you last hear?
you there for a second. Could you repeat the question?
What'd you last hear?
I heard you from the Bruce Lee quote.
Right. Bruce Lee talking about at the beginning of introduction to martial arts, a punch is just a punch, a kick is just a kick, and but then you start to progress and learn more about it, and a punch no longer is a punch, a kick's no longer is a kick. It's all these different things: hip rotation, power, proper timing, striking, relaxation, tension, and all this. But then once you start to become more disciplined, more experienced, you realize at the end of the day that a punch is just a punch, a kick is just a kick, and it's just simple execution and trial and error. Why do you think in this Western ideal that we overanalyze things?
That that is actually a very very deep question, and I could spend a very very large amount of time delving into it. I think the easiest way to answer that simply is to say that the Western mindset is very oriented around analysis. It's oriented around taking things apart and finding how they work. And this is a position that you could call reductionism, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You reduce things to the pieces. Uh, that has worked very well for us. Obviously, we have science and technology. We're talking to each other on little Star Trek view screens here.
Right.
But obviously, it works in some domains. Uh, what I think is where we run into the issue here, especially in biological sciences, and in our cases where we're training and eating, trying to figure out how to eat correctly. We're doing a very specific subfield of biology. I think that you find that this analytical mindset works very well with you're dealing with, say, physics, with chemistry, and with all these little domains we're doing now with the big data sciences. But I also think it leaves something out, something very important out when you're talking about biological realities. And this has been a tremendous interest of mine lately. But I think that biology is just something different entirely. I think that we get into this mindset of wanting to treat our bodies like they're machines, literally like a piece of clockwork. And they're just not like that. And if you try to use that mindset, that analytical mindset of taking things apart, you only get so far with a living organism before you just run into this roadblock. And it's not a matter of not having enough data. It's just because the organism itself is just something fundamentally different from a clock. I can go over here and take my clock off the wall, take it apart, understand all the pieces, and put it back together, and then I will have a fairly detailed understanding of that clock. You do that to a living organism, and you may not wind up with anything because where do you start? It's just so nested and interrelated from the genes right on up to the whole organism, and then the populations of organisms as they interconnect. So what I'm trying to get at there is that I have been trying to move away from this analytical reductive mindset and into a more of a holistic, how does this thing actually work type of viewpoint. And this is something that's become a big issue in the philosophical side of it. And when you're talking about the biology and how we're thinking about the biology, uh, and it's to the point now where the analytic mindset just does not cut it. But this is something that it's so ingrained in the culture and the thought process that we just bring it to the table anyway. This is why, I find myself, just kind of scratching my head when I see everyone who is obsessed with having a program. They want a spreadsheet. They want exact numbers. They want it precisely calculated out with precise percentages and a max plugged in at the top. And it spits out numbers for 12 weeks and it says, go do this workout. And I think that's actually fine because a lot of those workouts are fine. If you go do them, if you stick to them, it's going to work. Of course, it's going to work. But the question is it essential? And I don't think it is. And I think people mistake having that spreadsheet for actually training hard and training effectively. And that's kind of what I've been trying to get away from, is showing you that this is just the scaffolding on a building that you're building. You can take the scaffolding away and it still works. So that's, as you say, with the analytic mindset and tying that back to Bruce Lee, it is something that you do have to learn, I think. And I don't think it's any problem for beginners, for newbies, to have a structure there. But I also think that one of our goals as we progress is to start gradually taking that structure away and learning that, we're doing something that is not captured by the spreadsheet. So that's also been another big issue of mine that I'm trying to push, and tie that right back to what I was saying about the daily maxing and whatnot. I have an idea of what to do, but ultimately it just happens on the day.
Right. Awesome. I want to kind of go build into that what we were going off of though, where we can get the dogmatic behavior, where right versus wrong. I know you talked about this before, and it kind of relates to you're famous for your beer, your love of beer, but good eating versus bad eating, and all that type of dogmatic behavior. We get in so many freaking arguments in this industry. When again, it comes down to what you're talking about. It's go in and play it by ear and figure out. But let's talk about that. Good eating versus bad eating. We'll build off of that.
Uh, Eating is just such a complicated topic. It's even more so than training in some ways, and I think that that's all the more reason to try and streamline it. Um, if you look at it, you see all these arguments. It's like, is it low carb? Is it high carb? Is it, should I eat paleo? Should I do intermittent fasting? And it's just one of these situations where I think it is just paralysis by analysis. It is just such a glut of information, and half of it conflicts, half of it looks like it conflicts, and it really doesn't, just because people aren't making the effort to try and understand what's actually happening. And I mean, I try to treat my own personal eating is very similar to what I just said about training. I just try to find some simple rules to stick to that are going to be more or less right. And what I mean by right, okay, well, my diet is based on protein. That's my number one nutrient. So if I eat any meal, I try to make sure it has at least a reasonable size serving of protein. Beyond that, I try to limit my carb intake throughout the day, unless I'm being very, very active. That's rare. But I try to keep the carbs under control, and I try to make sure that they're reasonable quality. I want fruits, I want vegetables, I want at least good quality, non-processed type of grains. Uh, but as you say, I love beer. I drink beer constantly, and the thing of that is that it fits into the context of my diet. That's how I can make it work without being just a tremendous fat slob. And it's because I think people don't see that aspect of it. They think, oh yeah, Matt's drinking beer all the time. Well, that is kind of true, but they also don't see the other, rest of my diet, which allows me to do that. And I have been toying with intermittent fasting for the last 3 or 4 years now, and it's from Martin Berkhan's Lean Gains. And I don't follow any exact protocol from that. I was just inspired by Martin's idea of don't eat for most of the day and then spend that little six hours of eating at the end of the day, and it has worked. I was When I first moved to New Zealand in 2009, I weighed almost 100 kilos, and right now I'm about 83, and it's just come solely from just trying to not make any drastic changes to what I'm eating, but just the amounts. And the intermittent fasting helped me lower those amounts to something manageable, and it geared me towards eating more protein while I was doing it, and that's it. And so I see all these people overcomplicating things. And again, as I said about training, I think that it benefits some people who are trying to learn these habits. It benefits them to have a diet. I don't care if it is paleo. Paleo is not a bad way to eat. I don't agree with some of the scientific explanations for it, mind you, but I think that as a diet, it's fine. Intermittent fasting, it will work if you follow the guidelines. Just find something and do it, basically. It's something that agrees with you. Some people cannot eat any junk food. They have to be in diet mode. And if that is the case for them, then they're not going to agree with these diets that say go binge on junk food once a week or twice a week or whatever. So some people, they need that structure. They need to be in diet mode. Some people don't. Some people need the cheat meals. Okay, that's fine. Find it and do it. Make it work for you. And that's where I stand with the eating as well.
Awesome. Let's shift the conversation briefly to fat loss. And I know you had an article talking about or analyzation of aerobic work. It was a study I think you were reviewing. But whether the benefits of aerobic work, because it doesn't have some disdain for all the weightlifting and high intensity interval training crowd, where that's pretty much the end all be all. Talk about the benefits of aerobic work and why you think everyone should include it.
This is the aerobic thing. It's another one of those things that suffered from the fitness industry's fads, and it's, as you say, the high intensity interval training. It's become all the rage, and it's, oh, you don't have to do any long distance cardio anymore because you just do intervals, lift weights and do intervals, and keep your diet straight, and you'll get lean. And again, this is one of those things where there's some truth in it, and then it's not entirely true either. And the reason being is, as you pointed out from that blog article, I think that there are just people who do not respond to that approach. If you want to go into PubMed and find out reasons why, I mean, more power to you. But the point of it is I just had people that just didn't respond to that. And if they don't respond to it, and then I can throw them in aerobic cardio, and I'm not talking in excessive amounts here. I'm talking, go for a walk, 30 minutes for an hour. But when you throw that in, and then suddenly you see them start to drop, where previously they weren't. and you haven't changed their diet, you haven't changed their weightlifting or anything else. You just add in walks, and suddenly the scale starts to go down. Well, to me, that says there's something to it. And whether there's a physiological explanation for it, I'm sure there is. And I could probably put something together that sounds good. But bottom line for me is it gets the weight to start coming off. Uh, I think that in some ways this is a backlash to the whole 1980s obsession with aerobics, and then you have this whole thing with bodybuilders who just are constantly saying you have to do cardio to get lean, and they're talking 2-3 hours a day of cardio, and I see why there's a backlash to that, because I've known in my own time training with female bodybuilders and figure competitors that they in particular have this very uh, I don't want to use the word obsession, but they get very into this idea that they have to do this amount of cardio every day. And I've seen some of these women get into very destructive behaviors doing that, with the combination of starving themselves and overworking themselves on the aerobic work. And I think that in that sense, pushing them away from that and towards something that's more oriented towards strength training and shorter interval style workouts, I think that's good. But what I'm trying to get at is I think that in doing that, we don't need to lose sight of the fact that there are some populations of people who do benefit from the aerobic work as well. Even people who aren't endurance athletes. I'm going to use some real examples here of myself, but these have been largely females who were not obese, but just overweight and had a very hard time getting from that zone of just slightly overweight down to really lean. And these are the ones who you throw in the aerobic work, and suddenly all that weight that was stuck just starts to drop. And so I have just become a big fan of the idea that more activity in general is a good idea for a lot of these people that want to be in good condition. And that's where I'm coming from with that blog post.
Okay, so. Awesome. Dealing with people who want to lose weight, the time of year we're in the New Year's resolution time period. So that deals with bringing up the topic of adherence and ability to stick with a program for new trainees. What are your main tenements, main ideas that it takes for getting someone, if you're a trainer, because that's the message I want to get out here today, is for a trainer to be able to help a client who's coming to them who has a hard time being in here. This is a completely new thing to them, and they usually associate exercise with pain and struggle and starving themselves and getting hurt and all that. So go off on that.
The first thing I would say is that it's got to be a long-term process on our part as a trainer. We need to have a process in mind to gradually move someone away from that learned dislike of exercise. We need to move them and make them realize that it doesn't have to be this nightmarish struggle for existence every time you step into the gym. And I think that a big part of that is just getting away from this beat yourself up mindset. That's one. The other thing is I hesitate to use the word fun here, but it should be entertaining. It should be something that is not something that they fear. Okay, I think that's the number one thing, because you look at things like The Biggest Loser, for example, and you've got Jillian Michaels there screaming at some poor guy on a treadmill, and okay, that's great as long as he's got her there to do that. But the instant that outside stimulus goes away, he's going to go right back to the couch. So my goal is to try and find this balancing point between the fun and the motivating, and then the productive on the other hand. So how do you do that? Well, I think there's a lot of ways you can make that happen, and a big part of it comes from the incentive structure. Do they see changes? So I try to track lots of things. I try to track body measurements, I track the scale weight, track their lifts, track their performances and various activities. Give them something that you can show them on a regular basis. Hey, look, you made a big improvement this week. That, you may not think it's very much, but it has a way of building momentum in their minds. There is actually quite a reasonable bit of research on the topic of what's called self-efficacy in training and exercise, and this is where people feel like they're in control. They can say, hey, I'm in charge of this. I'm doing this. And if they have that working for them, then they are much, much more likely to adhere to an exercise and diet program over the long term, rather than just, showing up for the resolution, doing it for 4 weeks, and then deciding it's hard and going back, back to the couch. So I think that is a crucial element that is often left out, because this can come back to that analytic mindset. We've got this perfect program, we've got to get them on it. And then, well, the client themselves may have no interest in that. They may not see, in their minds, they may not see any value to doing that. They may just recognize it as, I'm going to the gym to be miserable for a few hours. And eventually, their default settings are going to win out. So what we're trying to do is not fight the couch potato. We're trying to transform the couch potato. And that takes the process of getting them in there and building habits. That's how I would approach that, is just think of it from their side. I don't mean to let them off the hook and make every workout a cakewalk that's while you're sitting there texting and they're on the treadmill. No, that's not what I mean. I'm just saying we have to balance the productivity side of it with the motivational and their emotional side of it.
Going off of that motivation, I want to hear how you talked about it before. These quotes that are blasted all over Twitter, Facebook, and stuff. Rise and grind, embrace the grind, little things like that. About how they are just they're nice in the fact that they're introductory, but to completely tie your motivation to it is not very sound. You need a story, not something that will create belief in the user, in whoever's reading that quote or saying, to get them to actually motivate. Because just saying rise and grind or whatever the phrase is, that one just particularly annoys me a little bit. But basically, going off of that, dealing with creating belief that these little quotes don't completely fulfill. They're just like introductory, if you will.
So I'm sorry, Kyle. Are you talking about the program itself or just the quotes?
Just quotes, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's say that the quotes that are going around, we can tie this right back into what I was saying before about training in a more of a relaxed mode. I think that folks just get set into this mindset of every workout has to be just a body breaking. You have to leave the gym puking and sweating, and you have to. If you're not working hard, you didn't work hard. Why bother go to the gym? And I just don't think that's true. I think that there are ways that you can grade your effort levels, and I think that most of the time, people want to be up here at the red line where they're at the breaking point. And in reality, training can be productive way down here in the yellow and green zone as well. And so my whole thing has been just pull back on that a little bit. There's no need to be up here at 100% every single freaking workout ever. And I think that ties right back to what we were saying just a second ago about the keeping people in the gym. If you're trying to push hard and you're pushing people into this point of pain and where it's no longer fun, but it's become a chore, then, that's my motivation when I try to train that way. I don't want to be at the gym when that's going on. But if I scale it back so that I'm working instead of 100%, I'm down here at 70 or 80, then it becomes much more sustainable. And I don't feel like I'm having to fight myself to get into the gym. And I don't know. I mean, I'm just one guy, but I just get the impression that everyone I have talked to about this, and we've run through this, and I still get emails to this very day saying, Matt, I read your articles. I'm so glad that you taught me this. I've been training constantly, but I just don't go all in all the time, and I feel so much better. And I'm like, well, that's great. I'm glad to get these emails because it tells me that I'm not. It's just not just me being lazy or whatever. It's actually a real thing, and I just think that that's interesting. That, as you say, you see these quotes going around. It's like, oh, you got to break yourself, and it's like, no, you don't. You absolutely do not. And in fact, you were probably working against your own interests by doing that. Even again, physical issues aside, I mean, you're much more likely to get injured training that way. You are going to feel horrible. And then when you start adding the psychological issues in on top of that, I mean, it just seems like a lose-lose situation to me. And it's one thing if you're a competitive athlete, okay, if you're getting in shape for a bodybuilding show, if you're a pro who has shows year round, If you are, competitive in any sport, I understand that. You have to do that. But for someone who is recreational, someone who doesn't have that incentive driving them, if you just are training for yourself to look better, to feel better, then I would highly recommend staying away from that type of thing most of the time.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, I want to go on to some questions that one of your fans, Christine Poirier, had asked. She addressed me via Facebook. So she had three questions in particular. So, question number one: what are your thoughts on purchasing fitness products that promote results within a given time frame, i.e., P90X, the 4-Hour Body, and others?
Um, I am on the fence about that because it's one of those things that I think I feel like I'm kind of professionally obligated to criticize, but I don't want to criticize them that much. Because main reason being is that I think that any exercise is better than no exercise when it comes to the general population, and especially when you start talking about P90X. I've got a friend of mine who is an ex-powerlifter and quite a large gentleman at that, and he began doing P90X about a year ago, just casually because he was no longer able or interested in going to the gym, and he's lost a tremendous amount of weight doing it. Uh, he's obviously not nearly as strong as he once was, but he's not worried about that either. So, you think about things like that, and you just have to put them in perspective. What is this actually meaning for the person doing it? And not everybody's going to go and be a power lifter or a bodybuilder or whatever have you. And I think we have to excuse me, we have to start recognizing that that's okay. They're doing something. They're not sitting on the couch and decaying into a gelatinous mass. So from that perspective, I think it's good. Um, I would criticize it just on the point that, okay, maybe as you say, it is kind of leaving these people hanging at the end of the program, and it's building in this addiction to the program, as we say. Uh, and I would tend to discourage people from it on those grounds, but with the caveat being, nothing says you can't repeat that program after it's done either. So we're kind of stuck in that ground there, and I don't want people feeling like they are beholden to an expert. That's my bugbear. I don't like people feeling like they have to attach themselves to this fountain of knowledge, and that if they don't have this expert there telling them what to do, then they can't succeed. I think that is part of learning the good habits that I spoke about earlier, is that you just need to realize that this stuff is not that complicated once you've got a base of training, to learn how your body responds. It's just not that complex. So if you can take P90X, or if you can take Tim Ferriss's workout and make it work for you, great. I don't see a problem with that. And I think from that vantage point, it's fine. But as I wouldn't have some hesitation about it building that addiction to the program. That would be my main concern, but I don't think it would be that much of a concern in the scheme of things. I just wish those things would have a way out, so to speak, because I don't want to see people trapped in that perpetual beginner phase, as it were. So that's really my thoughts on those things.
Perfect. All right, rolling on to number two. There is so much information out there, it is overwhelming. Is the fitness industry reinventing the wheel with different way to spin it, or is there room for exercise to evolve?
Uh, I don't think we're actually reinventing a wheel. If you look at the strength programs that we're doing now, just for one example, this is obviously not limited to strength, but if you look at what we're doing now and then compare it to how weightlifters are training in the 1930s and 1940s, it's not a big difference. I mean, I can go back and look at Bob Peoples' workouts from the 1940s, and he's doing the same stuff we're doing now. It was squats, it was deadlifts, it was sets of 5, sets of 3. Uh, by and large, there has just not been a tremendous change. Now, you'll get changes in a coach's interpretation of these ideas. So you'll get, every so often you'll have somebody will come along. You'll get a Louis Simmons from West Side who puts things together in a unique way. All right, but if you look at that, if you take it apart and look at it, it's just strength work. It's just a little bit of bodybuilding thrown in with the strength work. It's not reinventing as such. And I think that's part of part of the issue here with this training addiction, programming addiction, is that we don't separate the fundamentals from the implementation of the program. I can write right now, I can sit down and write 5, 10 different programs that are all based on the same principle, and I can sell them as completely different programs. And people in the industry who were not reading those with a critical eye would just think that, wow, Matt just came out with 5 different programs. And in reality, they're just different permutations of the same basic ideas that I hold in mind. So in that sense, I think we need to understand that there are only so many basics. There's only going to be so many ways that a muscle is going to respond to stimulus. There's only going to be so many ways that you are going to effectively make yourself stronger. And that's a very limiting set of rules, but it just happens to allow this very large space of different permutations, which we call different workouts. So I think that the glut of information, in some sense, it's a good thing, because there's more stuff to do, there's more things to choose from. But then again, you have to balance that with the fact that more information does not always make you more knowledgeable, and it doesn't always lead to better outcomes. So my suggestion in the face of that is find something you like. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's 5x5, if it's I don't know, if it's the bros workout I do, whatever. Pick it, stick with it, and work on it, and make it work for you. I think the worst thing you can do is start jumping around all over the place every time a new workout comes out, or you go do a Google search and you're like, oh, this program looks phenomenal. Well, you drop what you were doing, and then you go jump to this new thing, and you never get anywhere. So I'm kind of torn by that, but I think by and large the best thing to do is just to seal yourself away from it. Maybe spend a little time tinkering and see what you like. But once you find something, or 1 or 2 different ways of training that actually suit you very well, stick to them. Maybe rotate through them throughout the year, but by and large, don't go jumping all over the place. Find something and go.
All right. Number 3, her third and final question from Christine. Supplements, I'd like to hear everyone's take on these, such as fish oil.
Okay, well, let's start with fish oil in particular. I have taken fish oil since, about 2003, so it's almost 10 years I've been taking fish oil. And I was originally exposed to it just through a lot of the research studies that were coming on the internet around that time, which were showing that, wow, fish oil is just an amazing supplement. It contains the essential fatty acids, the EPA and DHA. And there were just all these studies coming out showing that, wow, this just has effects on everything. It's great for cardiovascular health, it's great for brain health, it's great for fat metabolism, all this and that. And it comes to find out that, evidently the average Western diet is just deficient in these omega-3 fats. So, this was all the rage was, start supplementing, take your fish oil, take your fish oil. And I took it, and I still take it to this very day. There's been some issue of late. I don't know if you followed on our Facebook account, but there's been some articles posted by a gentleman named Ray Peat, and Pete seems to think that there's he seems to think it's the exact opposite. He actually is suggesting that these fatty acids are actually poisonous if taken in amounts, and I found that skeptical. I'm really quite skeptical of his argument in a lot of ways, just because there are so many trials showing fish oil to have a positive effect. Personally, I will say that I think that a lot of the health benefits of it are overblown, especially with regard to cardiovascular disease and to mortality rates. I don't think it's not a panacea. It's not going to fix a lifetime of problems because you start taking a supplement. I think it is important if you are eating a diet that doesn't have some kind of oily fish in it. I think it is important to have it in your diet for just generic health. Now, I try to treat supplementation as different than I think a lot of people do. I don't treat it as magic pills. I don't go in expecting to take it and I'm going to gain 30 pounds of muscle in 6 weeks. I'm not that kind of supplement taker. But I will say that from my own perspective, fish oil has been an amazing thing for my mental health. I find that when I'm not taking it, my mental state just is not what it is when I am taking 6 grams a day. So it doesn't take a large amount. If we're going to talk about supplements in general, I take a very skeptical approach to any supplement. And the reason being that I spent about a decade ago, I worked in GNC for a while. And wow, you want to talk about an eye opener. I mean, you just see it's just this constant conveyor belt of supplements coming in and out. And they'll bring out the new thing for this season, and it's all the rage, and all the teenagers are flocking in to spend their paper route money on the Celtec or whatever. And then, the next summer is something else, and the summer after that is something else. It's always something. And to me, it's more a marketing machine than it is actual useful products. Now, I'm not even going to give a list of things that I would take, because I find myself to this very day, I still tinker with a lot of herbs, a lot of things of that nature, just to see. I don't mind dropping, $10, $20 here and there just to see if something might have something to it. What I would suggest, because this is largely not my area of expertise, but there is a site, it's called examine.com.
Curtis Frank has been on the show with Examine. You know Curtis.
Okay, great. Okay, well, Examine, I think, is wonderful, because they have done so much work just delving into all these actual research papers, and they are very careful to delineate what is actually a good research study and what is questionable and what might not be worth listening to. So I have kind of defaulted to going to Examine if I have any questions about whether a supplement is even worth taking, because you'll find that some of these things will show, kind of borderline effects. And you say, well, is this worth taking? Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And, you can go and look and see if there's actually been any work or not. So that would be my suggestion before bothering to spend money on anything. At least go have a look and see if there is any literature and what it might tell you about it. The only things that I would really recommend on my own account for really, really, really works, I say creatine. I think creatine is worth taking if you don't eat a lot of beef. I think it's worth taking even if you do, in some regards, as I found that it's got so many physiological positive effects, and it is such a subtle effect in some ways that I think some people will not ever notice what it's doing for them. But I think it is still there, even if you don't. It's not going to be like, I gained 30 pounds of muscle in 6 weeks type of gain, but I think it's still doing positive things. Ephedrine was great while you could still get it in reasonable quantities. I don't know if you still can in the States.
You can get it. You can get it in the form of Broncaid, like a bronchitis medication.
Right. I think that works. If you need a pre-training kick, or if you just are, for trying to control appetite on a diet, I think it's wonderful. I thought DMAA was quite a nice little supplement while it lasted as well. But as I say, by and large, I don't get into supplements beyond that kind of thing. So that's really the extent of my thoughts on it.
All right. Well, I wanted to wrap up this interview based on two of your kind of recurring articles you've written that'll probably have a little bit of traction as far as controversy, if you want to say, in a lot of circles, where it comes to adrenal fatigue and CNS fatigue. Let's get into that. We might be on here for another hour and a half with this conversation, but let's get into
it. All right. Well, fortunately, we've already laid a lot of the groundwork for that, because it goes back to what I said earlier about training recovery, about how it's not just in here and it's not just in your body. It is a combination of the two. And I'm going to use a metaphor here that I hope will make a little bit of sense to understand this. But if you think about a tropical cyclone, just a hurricane, it's a big cloud. It spins, and it's got a defined eye. It's got a structure to it. That hurricane, it's nothing but water. It's just hot water that just happens to be organized in a very structured way. Okay, well, when a hurricane goes over land, it starts to break up. Okay, it loses its energy source over the ocean, and it starts to break into pieces. It goes back into just being normal water. All right, well, our bodies are kind of like that. In a way, they are constantly bringing in material and shuffling material out. So it's this process of turnover. And if you can imagine a hurricane, if it gets near land and it says, whoa, hang on, and it starts to back off so that it doesn't die, basically. Our bodies are like that. We have it's what's called homeostasis. It's this mechanism of maintaining balance. All right, well, for a long time, we were under the impression that it was just a matter of these adrenal hormones. You've got cortisol, and then you've got the catecholamines, which are adrenaline and norepinephrine. And they do different things. They're They're basically your body's response system. So anytime you encounter a stress, these things they gear up and they're trying to protect you from the stress. Now, what we've come to discover is that it's not just these hormonal levels that matter. It's actually this whole process of your entire body is changing, and it's mediated through the brain. So your brain is kind of like the guy that's spinning plates. You know, he's got all the plates spinning, and he's trying to manage them and keep them in the air. Your brain is doing that all the time, every day. It's managing all these things. And so when you say you're driving and then some jerk runs a red light and almost hits you, okay, well you're in alarm state. Okay, so your brain is suddenly he's stopping these plates a little bit. He's going over here and he's working these. He's trying to keep you alive. And this is a vestigial reaction. It's very old. Every mammal has it. And so anyway, what we're getting into is coming back to the hurricane metaphor. What we find is that when your brain has to stop what it's doing and then shift you away from the danger, that is actually very metabolically expensive. It's a very costly activity. It's also damaging. And there's a very good book on this. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's written by Robert Sapolsky. And this was just such an eye-opener book for me because this is his whole case, is that the very act of coping with stress is stressful. It's damaging to our bodies. Now, it's fine if you were just, say you have that neural head-on collision and you get stressed out and you spike and then you relax, you calm down, and the rest of the day nothing else happens. Okay, well, that's fine. That's exactly how that was intended to work. But what actually happens, he says, is that people wake up in the morning, they start slamming coffee, they sit in traffic on the way to work, they sit at their cubicle all day stressed out, got a boss breathing down their neck, they come home through traffic again, they come home and the wife's mad at them and then the kids are yelling at them and they stay stressed out until they go to bed at night. So instead of just these brief spikes, we sit in it all day long, and that is what is damaging to us. Okay, well, tie this back into adrenal fatigue. Well, turns out what's actually happening is not fatigue at all. It is this process of these hormones being elevated constantly. So your brain is constantly trying to manage stress, which really isn't there. It's in your head. It's all psychological, but it cascades down into these system-wide effects. And if you do it long enough, if you sit in that state for months or years at a time, it takes its toll on you. It actually, your body is not meant to work that way, but we're trying to make it work like that. And it's a very short jump from that understanding to what you could call adrenal fatigue or CNS fatigue from training. And it ties exactly back into what I just said previously about how people want to train amped up all the time. If you're doing that all the time and you're never giving your body time to reset itself, then you're going to feel like crap, basically. And if you keep it up long enough, I think you will eventually get hurt or have a very severe episode of burnout. So this is what I always try to tell people. It's not that overtraining does not exist. It does exist. It's just that it's not what you think. It is not, I feel bad after I worked out hard, therefore my CNS is burned out. That's not it at all. It's a chronic condition that adds up over months and years. So that's the Cliff's Notes of that. Now, there's obviously a lot more detail that can be added to that story, but that's the quick rundown.
So how do you press the reset button when that's the case?
You got to learn how to relax. I've gotten to a point in my own life where people say, "Hey Matt, what do you take for your post-workout drink?" And it's chamomile tea. I actually have, I'll make a cup of tea and I relax and listen to some classical music and just try to flatline it and just let everything reset itself. If you're the type of person who has been training and has been, beating yourself up with that psyched up training for a very long span of time, and you are actually feeling the effects of this, relax. And it's not, the prescription is often to stay out of the gym, but I don't think that's always enough. I think it is about learning how to cope with these things in your daily life as well. And I have become a big advocate of meditation for that purpose. I think that spending, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes a day, just sitting there and breathing and paying attention, it's enough to start cultivating these habits in your mind. And I think that it actually does transfer to these other domains where, say you are having, a problem with your boss, or you are sitting in traffic and you're finding yourself getting mad. You can bring that toolkit out from that you learn from meditation to calm yourself down. And this has actually been shown that it has a physiological effect. It actually does help bring the stress level under control and calm you down. So I think that learning to relax in the gym and to not beat yourself up is one facet of that. But I think it's much more crucial to learn how to be relaxed throughout the rest of your life.
Awesome. Well, that's a great way to wrap it up. That was awesome. I appreciate you coming on, Matt. This was a phenomenal interview. It's actually the longest interview, I believe, yet on the show. So you get that.
Okay, Kyle. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to talk to you.
Awesome. Again, you can check out Matt's site at myosynthesis.com. Again, this was Kyle Bohannon with the Art of Physical Fitness. Stay tuned for more episodes of the show. Matt, I want to thank you again. And for everyone else, I'll talk to you guys later and see you on the next episode.